Part 4. I felt Jonathan's stare and huffed as I shook the thoughts. He smiled, letting his eyes lock onto mine. I must admit, I am very curious about what you keep getting so absorbed in. His gray eyes were incredible, and I swallowed, turned away, and shrugged. I do that a lot. Don't take it personally. It happens when you're shut in most of the time, I added as a little dig. He chuckled and shrugged. Well then, let's see what I can do about that. That set off Allison's chipper reaction again, and she asked when we would be going. I want to have time to go shopping for the perfect outfit. She gave me a quick look that said she really meant she needed to take me shopping. We could go tomorrow night, he stated, still flashing that smile. If he wasn't so relaxed and gorgeous, it would be really annoying. Allison panicked, her eyes wide. Tomorrow? Well, yes, we could find something to wear. I can't go tomorrow, I stated calmly, looking around the massive room. Then how about Saturday, he offered, which was the day after tomorrow. The place is usually packed, but, he replied, seeing me wince, there is a private loft there. You can see all the action without being thrown into the mob. I chewed my lower lip, racking my brain to think of something I had to do Saturday. The initiation of the new wolves would still be going on, but my father had only allowed me a few hours tomorrow. Jonathan leaned down a bit, making direct eye contact with me and waiting for me to come up with my next excuse. I don't have anything to wear, I tried, hearing how pathetic that sounded as soon as it came out. He grinned, his eyes still fixed on mine. I'm sure Allison can help you with that. Oh, yes, she exclaimed. We can go into town and find the perfect outfits. We can go first thing tomorrow night. Jonathan straightened himself. I offer you my closed car, if you would like to leave earlier. I have my own, I snapped, a bit more harshly than I meant to. Gads, I so wanted to dislike him. My cold attitude usually sent them off running. Why was he being so stubborn? Will you be coming with us? Allison asked him, and I mentally added another check mark on the con side of the list I had in my head for her. I'd be happy to accompany you both, he stated. Then I smiled wide, seeing my opportunity. Like I said, I can't go tomorrow night. I have a commitment already, but you two could go without me. Ha! Allison's smile had gotten bigger, but I had finally succeeded in wiping that gorgeous smile off Jonathan's face. Score one for me. He was trapped. He already admitted he could go, so he couldn't change his mind now. I was nearly beaming with self-pride when I saw a twinkle come back into his eyes that sucked part of my gloating away in an instant. So, you'd allow us to pick out your outfit for you, he replied, the smile back on his perfect face. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. I looked at Allison and nodded slowly. I would talk to her later and lay down some ground rules. I wasn't going anywhere dressed in one of her high-fashion T-top costumes. He gave a victorious nod. Well then, it is settled. Allison and I will go into town tomorrow, and you'll wear whatever we pick out? I opened my mouth to argue, but he smiled. I do hope you'll give me more credit than I see in your eyes right now. I clamped my mouth shut, crossed my arms, and grumbled, Fine. I don't think Allison's feet actually touched the floor all the way back to the main hallway. I turned to Jonathan. My stance clearly stated that this was the end of our tour. I'll have someone show you to your room, I said flatly. No need. I've already seen them, he stated, his eyes still watching me more than I liked. Michael stepped up behind me. 1 hour until dawn, he stated, and I nodded. Then Michael turned to the two guests. In 30 minutes, the manor will go on lockdown. There are steel sheets that cover all openings. Should you wish to stay awake, you'll be perfectly safe to do so. Jonathan nodded. I am very interested in the security measures you have here. I'll arrange for a tour of them for the eve then, Michael stated in a low but professional tone, standing nearly in front of me to also emphasize the end of our time together. He was awesome. Jonathan grinned at me and bowed. Until the eve then. I do hope to see you before you have to leave for your commitment. I gave a confused nod and turned, grabbed Allison and pulled her along with me as she twisted to say goodnight to him. Oh my God, he's amazing, she whispered when she was sure he couldn't hear us. Smart, absolutely gorgeous, and he likes you. Again, she must have been talking to herself, since she jumped right into their trip to the city without waiting for my reply. When we stopped at her door, I pointed a finger at her. You had better not come back with some crazy outfit thinking I will wear it. She actually looked offended, and I felt that pang of guilt again. Reina, I would never do that to you. I think I know your style, and I want you to have a really good time. I wouldn't spoil that by getting you something that you would be miserable in. I groaned a quiet thank you and turned, almost running into Ander as I headed towards my own rooms. When I was safely behind my own bedroom doors, I leaned on them. I made it, I sighed, then rolled my eyes as I heard Anders' soft chuckle from the other side. He and Michael would be going to sleep, as well as my day guards would be taking over. I rarely ever saw them, but they were werewolves. Neither were part of my pack, which bothered me a bit, but my father hired them for their abilities and said that was more important. I disagreed, but when it came to my safety, my daughterly powers faltered. Free of my odd new acquaintances, I yanked off my clothes and kicked off Allison's shoes that were surprisingly comfortable. I crammed my leg into my pajama bottoms, intent on being mad, though I wasn't exactly sure I had any real reason to be. The t-shirt was thrust over my head, and I nearly stomped to my large four-poster bed. As if the steel plates that locked into place over the windows weren't enough, there were specially made curtains on the inside. They blocked every possible hint of light out. I guess in case the plates failed to engage. The same curtains were hung from ceiling to floor around my bed, as well as having a full wall between it and the window. Did I mention my father was a bit paranoid when it came to my safety? I smiled. He was a wonderful father, and I would forgive his faults, just like he forgave mine. It was pitch black inside my little sanctuary, but I liked it that way. I slipped under the covers and then reached under my pillow, feeling around until I felt something soft and pulled it to me. Yes, vampires slept. We went into a type of stasis. We didn't have to sleep every night, but it did prolong our life, not physically, but mentally. Very important for those that lived, well, let's just say for a very long time. Many vampires that chose not to have the slumber period went mad from the constant need for stimulation. I guess sleeping helped us much like it did other races. It gave our minds a break, allowed it to reset and refresh. For vampires that were used to it, we became a bit agitated if we went too long without it. I pulled my little stuffed wolf to me and snuggled against it. Track had given it to me years ago, and I had slept with it every night since. He had actually slept with it prior to giving it to me, so it had his scent. I wasn't sure how a stuffed animal retained his smell so well. but I was pretty sure that Track snuck in here now and then and rescented it, for lack of a better term. I didn't care. That actually made it more special. I smiled and nuzzled my little friend, closed my eyes, and felt myself shift into stasis, my body and mind almost sighing as it relaxed. Chapter 3. Reina, are you awake? I blinked and listened hard. Sure, I had imagined the voice. Then it came again. Allison? I muttered, completely confused. Yes, it's me. I'm sorry to come in here, but... But what? I growled, not able to hide my irritation. How had she gotten past my guards anyhow? What time was it? I pulled the clock out from under my pillow and groaned. It was only 5 p.m. I saw the curtains move a bit and peered in disbelief as a blonde head popped inside my refuge. My eyes adjusted quickly. Vampires saw perfectly fine in the dark. My wolf genes only made it take a split second longer to focus. She looked around as I slid Wolfie under my covers, then sat on the edge of my bed. I shook my head, still trying to fathom what was happening. I thought you should know what's going on, she stated, pretending she hadn't seen my stuffed animal. One mark on the pro side for her. That got my attention and I sat up. She nodded. Track and 2 other werewolves are here. They're in talking with your father. About what? I asked. It wasn't unusual for my father to be up so early. After all, we didn't really have to sleep every night. I was actually the only one that did it on a regular schedule. But why were the others here? I don't know, but they didn't look happy. They're in your father's study and... Well, I can't hear what they're saying. Soundproof walls, I explained. But you said they didn't look happy? Not at all. What are you doing up so early? She shrugged. I was too excited about the shopping trip, she confessed, having the decency to look embarrassed. As she stood and stepped back, I moved to the edge and flung my legs over. I looked across the room at the door and she shrugged. They let me in. Okay, now that had me worried. If the guards let her come in and wake me up, it most likely meant they thought I should know too. That spurred me into action and I headed for the door. You aren't going out there like that, are you? She whispered. I looked down at myself, grumbled under my breath, and went to my dresser. I grabbed a pair of jeans, kicked off my pajama bottoms, and yanked them on. Then I trotted to my closet, grabbed the first t-shirt my hands touched, and then yanked a bra off the hook. I finished changing with the closet door between us, and then stepped out and looked at her as if to say, There, is this any better? She eyed my hair and I groaned, grabbed a brush off my dresser table, ran it through my hair and slammed it down. That was all she was going to get. She nodded, either in understanding or approval, and we both headed to the door. When I opened it, Michael and Anders stood looking at me. I had always wondered when their shifts started. I looked down the hall and Michael nodded. They're in the first floor study. I nodded back and headed down the hallway, in my bare feet. Allison trotted along next to me, her face worried. What do you think has happened? You don't have any shoes on. I don't know, but I'll find out, I stated, and I don't wear shoes unless I have to. I gave a quick shrug when she frowned. Track had free rein of the manor, but to show up with the others from the pack and to be in a meeting with my father so early, my mind rushed with the possibilities. Had something happened during the day? Had the security been breached, or was there a threat here? Was something going on in Polson? I shook that off. If there was a serious threat, my father and I would have been taken out immediately. I knew that drill well. We turned a corner and saw my father's bodyguards standing outside a door. They murmured good eve to me, and I looked back at the door. no longer sure that I wanted to find out what had the manor in such an uproar, at least this blonde occupant. Finally, I squared my back, stepped up, and knocked on the thick doors that were lined with some kind of metal that didn't allow ears to hear through it, even vampire ears, or especially vampire ears, depending on how you wanted to look at it. I waited, shifting my bare feet. Finally, there was a click, and I stepped back as it opened. Track's face appeared, and his brows furrowed. "What are you doing up so early?" he whispered, and I had to laugh. "Me? What are you doing here, and what's going on?" Track looked behind him, said something, and then stepped out into the hall. I backed up, and he turned to see Allison, immediately realizing what had happened. "It's nothing," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then why are you all in here? And why are you all here and in there?" I stated, gesturing with my chin to the closed door behind him. He shook his head and looked at Allison. "You shouldn't have woke her. She gets grumpy if she wakes up too early." My eyes widened and he smiled at me. "That isn't going to work, Trent," I stated. He flinched as I used his real name, and I was instantly sorry, but held my ground. The door behind him opened, and we all turned as my dad and two other men stepped out. I recognized the other wolves. They were part of my pack, but I only knew one of their names. They were older and not part of the group that I hung out with. My father looked at me, then at Allison, then down at my bare feet. He nodded to the two men, and then stepped up to us when they turned and left. "Well, what has you up so early?" he said, shooting a quick glance at Allison before turning his smile on me. "What's going on, Dad?" He frowned a bit, took another sideways look at Allison, and shook his head. "Track and the others come once a week to discuss pack issues, Reina." My stance faltered, and I looked at Track, who nodded. I glanced at Allison, who looked like she wished she could blush or hide behind something. My eyes turned back to my father's, and I inspected his for any hint that he was hiding something. We heard other footsteps and turned to see Jonathan walking up. He was dressed in expensive jeans and a deep blue button-up shirt. Was there any color that didn't look good on him? I shook the thought and turned back to my dad. "I'm afraid you woke up for nothing," he stated, giving Allison one of those looks the grown-ups gave you when you did something stupid. "I am so sorry, Mr. Beltran," she whispered, her eyes wide. "I saw them come in, and then you all went in there, looking so serious. I thought—" He smiled and put a hand on her shoulder. "Reina has no idea of what happens before 6 o'clock around here," he chuckled. Track smiled, and I felt the urge to stick my tongue out at him. My father turned and introduced my best friend to Jonathan. Both guys gave each other a quick visual appraisal and then reached out and shook hands. The sexy vampire turned to me. Your father has approved our date tomorrow night," he stated, and I flinched at the word. I felt Track stiffen and realized Jonathan had used the word for a specific reason. Boys. Allison's embarrassment was quickly forgotten, and she beamed. "Wonderful! Then Jonathan and I will go into town tonight to get our outfits." She even clasped her hands to her chest. If she started to twirl, I was writing her off as a friend option, period. My father looked at me. His eyes twinkled with a bit too much enjoyment for my liking. "Wouldn't you rather go with them to pick out something to wear?" I looked down at my feet. "No, Dad. You know I have something else to do tonight." Allison nodded. "Yes, Mr. Beltran, she has entrusted Jonathan and I to pick out her clothes." "Really?" he said, with actual shock. I looked up at him, and she nodded proudly. "She has agreed to wear whatever we pick out." My father threw his head back and laughed, and I turned to track, hoping to get some aid, but he wasn't smiling. Instead, he was looking over at Jonathan, and his eyes were tight. I reached out and took Track's hand. "Maybe you could come with us," I stated, suddenly feeling a glimmer of hope. "Where exactly are you going?" he asked, finally peeling his stare away and looking at me. "Beamer's," I whispered, biting my lower lip. "I see," was all he said, and I sighed. Beamer's, the one place we avoided and labeled as a place that all the T-tops went, and now I was going. I turned to Jonathan, who lifted his eyes from our hands. "You wouldn't mind, would you, if he came too?" I tried to flash him a smile. "Not at all," Jonathan stated, taking a step closer to us. "Track, is it?" "That's what they call me." I turned and shot Track a hard look, but he ignored me. Jonathan nodded, but was smiling at me. "Well then, Track, we would be happy to have you along." Then he did look at my best friend. "Why don't you bring your girlfriend too?" "I don't have a particular one at the moment," came my best friend's tight response, and I felt his grip tighten on my hand. My father stepped in then, physically putting himself between the two guys. "Well then, seems Allison and Jonathan have their work cut out for them, and it seems that you will all have quite the adventure tomorrow." He winked at me and turned to Michael. "I want you to meet with Jonathan to discuss Reina's security." Michael nodded, and Jonathan turned to him. "Good. I want to make sure she is able to have the time of her life tomorrow." He actually winked at me, and I almost cried out as Track's grip on my hand got even stronger. So much for them being friends. Not that it mattered to me. My father smiled and looked at me. "Remember what I said. Only a few hours tonight." I frowned, glancing over at Track, but he nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll have her back by midnight." "Midnight?" I gasped. "What am I, a pumpkin?" Track grinned and looked around me and nodded to Allison. "See what happens when you wake her too early?" Then pulled me out of the group and started towards the stairs that led to my wing. Jonathan watched until Michael cleared his throat, and the two of them left to see to the security details. Allison caught up with us and started in about what she was going to wear to the mall and how none of her friends were going to believe that she was going with Jonathan Hilver. "Why don't you have him take a few pictures with you there, for proof?" Track teased, as we walked up the stairs. I chuckled, but Allison nodded, pulling out her cell phone and starting to text with a speed that boggled my mind. I had a cell phone, only because my father insisted on it. I started to wonder exactly where I had put it, or when I'd last seen it, for that matter. "I am sorry I can't come to the initiation with you," Allison stated, sliding her phone closed and tucking it in her back pocket. My brows rose and Track nodded, almost looking serious. "We understand." We all stopped at the top landing, and Allison looked down a different hall. "Well, I'd better go get ready." Then she frowned. "I wonder when we're supposed to leave." She glanced down the stairs, and I shrugged. "I'm sure he'll let you know." Her smile returned, and then she lunged and hugged me tightly. I stiffened and didn't return the gesture. She shot Track a sincere smile. "I'm glad you're coming with us tomorrow. I think it will help Reina loosen up and actually have some fun." She grinned playfully at me and then turned and bounced towards her room. I shook my head and Track chuckled. "You know, I am not sure I can go tomorrow." My eyes popped and I turned to him, panic on my face. He shrugged. "The new wolves." "Please, I can't do—" I stammered. He sighed. "Well, I don't know. I could ask permission. Say I have to go watch over you. Yes, please ask. I will ask. Let's go ask now." He laughed. "Slow down, Reina. I'm not sure they'll let me. Everyone knows how good you are at getting yourself into trouble." I huffed and then shrugged. Okay, so maybe that was a little true. It was never on purpose, though. Besides, I didn't care, as long as they said yes. "Can I go take a quick shower?" "Please do." I slapped his arm and he chuckled as we walked. "So, that's Jonathan, huh?" "Yes." He shrugged. "Not so amazing." "A bit jealous," I chuckled, eyeing him. Then I yelped as he bent down and scooped me up into his arms. I grunted and looked over his shoulder as Ander actually laughed out loud behind us. "You know, Ray, if I wanted to make you fall for me, it wouldn't be that hard," he stated as he started to walk with me in his arms. "Excuse me?" I snapped, leaning my head back to look at him hard. "Yep. No female can resist Track's charm once I decided to turn it on them," he replied with a snide grin, then laughed and tightened his grip as I huffed and started to wiggle myself free. When it came to strength, we were nearly equal, but in my position it was a bit hard to gain any leverage. He finally put me down outside my bedroom door and ducked as I took a swing at him. "Come on, Ray, you know I was just teasing you," he chuckled. I actually growled and then stopped short, shocked that I had done it. Track grinned wider and stepped up. Maybe you do like me more than," was all he got out before I shut my door in his face. "I'll be waiting in the sitting room," he called out from the other side, the laughter still in his voice. "Take your time getting all pretty." I growled again and stormed across the room into my bathroom. I grumbled and cursed under my breath as I took my clothes off and slammed them into the hamper out of habit. I reached in the shower and turned it on, then waited for the temperature to adjust, and was still mumbling as I stepped in. Once I put my head under the shower, though, I sighed and closed my eyes. There was nothing better than a nice hot shower to make you forget just about anything. I let the sound drown out my thoughts and pushed my hair back out of my eyes. By the time I stepped out, I was smiling and dried off quickly, starting to get excited about going to Polson. Halfway through towel drying my hair, I felt my legs go weak. I looked down at them in surprise and then had to grab the sink to hold myself up. My mind spun and then realization hit me as I went down. I called out to Track and reached over, pulling my robe off the hook by its hem. I barely had it over me when the door flew open and he rushed in, with Michael and Ander right behind him. I was sitting, slumped against the wall now, and I was glad I had gotten to the robe first. "What happened?" he asked, his face tight with worry. I shrugged lethargically. "Allison woke me up so fast, and then everything else happened. I forgot to eat," Ander finished, bending down and handing Track a small container that looked like a mini thermos. Track frowned as he checked a digital readout on the front, then unscrewed the top. "You know better, Reina," he chastised, but his voice was soft as he held it to my lips. I did know better. Most vampires could go days without feeding, but once again my condition limited me in that area as well. I had to feed at least every 12 hours, or it was as if all the strength was sucked right out of me. I had pushed the too far a few times, and once far enough that everyone thought I was going to die, like completely die. As I drank down the warm liquid, I felt the strength return, and I finally sat up and took the canister from his hands and finished it myself. He inhaled the smell and had to turn away as I heard his stomach rumble. I licked my lips and nodded, handing it back to Ander. "Please don't tell my dad," I begged, wrapping the robe around me and standing up, with Track watching me closely. "I don't need another lecture." Michael and Ander both nodded, though they didn't look happy. Track looked me over, his eyes tight, and I could hear his heartbeat trying to steady. "I'm fine," I chuckled. "Embarrassed, but fine." He nodded, still frowning, and I sighed. "Okay, can you guys leave now so I can get dressed?" My bodyguards turned and walked out, but Track stayed. "You're not standing there while I get dressed," I said, still trying to make him smile. "You have to be more careful, Ray," he stated, his voice softer than made me feel comfortable. "I should have made sure you ate." I eyed him hard. "Since when is it your job to make sure I eat?" The look on his face made me flinch, and I turned and looked around the bathroom. Okay, this was awkward. He finally nodded and walked towards the door. "I'll be right outside." "In my bedroom?" I asked, a bit confused by what just happened. "Just in case," he stated quietly, and then closed the door. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to replay what had just happened. I wasn't sure, but something seemed odd, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I finally hung the robe back up on its hook and picked up my blow dryer, stealing another confused glance at the closed door. And that's where I'm going to stop this one.